Hey guys, so part of the reason I've kept it so light this week is for me to go through your papers, which I spend a lot of time reading through drafts. In the future, drafts are not going to be so in depth with comments because hopefully we'll start to identify some things ourselves as well as have peer editing, which I decided to opt out of for this paper, but also just to kind of give you a little bit of mental space away from your paper also before we jump into a new unit next week. So you notice that I pushed back the due date, and a lot of that had to do with just how long it is taking me to go through the papers, and because I've had a lot of office hours this week as well. And that also gives you some time to visit the Writing Center on Monday or Tuesday, as well as schedule office hours with me. So I want to make sure that when you turn in your final paper on Tuesday night, you feel so incredible about it. But the best way to go about that is to really spend some time with the draft that I commented on and actively go through the process of revision. And so most of us aren't taught how to revise. We think of it as just like editing or proofreading and then we're done. But the kind of revising that I want to talk about is more radical revision, where you're not just sort of going through and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. You're kind of remaking in many ways your paper from the inside out. And so it takes a little bit of practice, but there's our writing lab of the week, which I pushed off to now. I'm not going to have any credit for this writing lab for this week, but it's going to be part of your overall paper grade. I'll explain what I mean in a minute. So where am I going? It's really interesting. I read a study about a year ago where some educators were interviewing both teachers and students about, like, how do you define revision? And the students defined it like this. These are just two of the quotes. Using better words, eliminating words that are not needed. I go over and change words around. And another said cleaning up the paper and crossing out. It is looking at something and saying, no, that has to go, or no, that's not right. So educators, we'll come back to this, but educators, this is what they said. On one level, finding the argument, and on another level, language changes to make the argument more effective. And a matter of looking at the kernel of what I have written, the content, and when thinking about it, responding to it, making decisions, and actually restructuring it. So think, what's different about these? There's quite a few things that are different. I'll just sort of take a beat for you to think about what's different between these two. One of the main ones that sticks out to me is just how overwhelmingly negative students view the revision process. I mean, look at using better words, what you have isn't good enough, things that aren't needed, eliminating, changing, cleaning up, crossing out, saying it's not right. That kind of mindset, we definitely feel, as somebody who has had to revise quite a lot of papers, that I just didn't do it right and I have to fix this so that it's not bad anymore. Whereas educators, they look at it a lot more positively as kind of this, like, I'm striving to make this thing better. And I know I don't expect people to change their mindset completely, but there's something a lot more positive about this. And also the educators are looking at sort of like what the paper is rather than just sort of what it looks like. There's not a right or wrong. It's like, I want to look at the kernel and see, how I can make this thing more effective, how I can make it better. And so revision is unfortunately a process we have to do with every single paper, which is why I give you guys, credit for different drafts and things like that. But it is not fun to do. I fully admit. So true revision involves reseeing, rethinking, and reshaping the piece, resolving a tension between what we intended to say and what our paper actually says. And maybe you had this experience while you were writing. You had moments of frustration, and I certainly feel this way of when I'm writing something, even as stupid as an email, thinking, that is not at all what I was trying to say. Like, I know exactly what I want to say, and it's just not, like, I can't get it to be articulated in a certain way. And that's definitely harder when you're writing in a language that's not your first language too. But this idea of resolving tensions, so we're not trying to correct what's wrong. And you'll notice in your comments, I ask you guys a lot of questions because I'm reading this not knowing what you mean. And so I want you to be able to reveal what your argument is. And very rarely will I say that something is incorrect. Ideas can't really be incorrect. Something can be incorrectly analyzed, or maybe a quote is taken out of context. When it comes to your own ideas, I can't tell you that's wrong, but I can say, I don't really get what you're saying. Let's try to find another way to do it. What this means is that we have to open ourselves up to the possibility that parts of our paper, and in some cases, entire pages, and I don't think there's anybody who has like an absolute entire paper to fix, but it will need to be rethought and rewritten. And some people find that it's almost easier to start from scratch. I don't think you have to do that. That's part of why I'm also giving you guys a little bit more time. So just sort of take a deep breath and hold back those tears, and let's talk briefly about how we can go about that. So there's two different types of revision. One is local revision, and you guys love this. This is the easiest thing to do. It's the low-hanging branch. You get the comments back, you fix the comments. So these are sentence level revisions. You literally start at the beginning, you sift through, and every time you see a comment bubble, you fix that thing. And sometimes that totally works. Like if there's grammatical issues, if I've said like, hey, this sentence, you need to fix this one thing. If I'm clarifying, well, what do you mean about that? Yeah, that's local. You're just sticking with that area. And so you'll notice I made quite a few local changes or local comments, and you can go through from start to finish and address those if you'd like, the traditional way we like to revise. Some things you may see a lot of. I think there's a couple papers that I had a little like coding with numbers in the comments. So the first papers I graded have numbers, but most papers used sort of color coding, and I use colors a lot when I'm grading. If you see a lot of blue, I have a comment off to the side, but it means we can combine that language, that maybe there's a sentence that can be said more succinctly, or maybe there's two sentences that can be combined to make it a lot more authoritative and direct. And we're going to talk in the next paper about how we can condense clutter, which makes us sound so much more professional. It's my favorite tip for sounding more professional and authoritative, is cutting down and being direct with our language. You may also notice some green, and I highlighted stuff in green that I had to read twice. So our goal as writers is that we don't want to break anybody out of, sort of like, we don't want to break the fourth wall if you're in theater or if you're in film. And anything that I had to read twice, that means that I've stopped tracking your argument, and I have to now go through and reread that sentence again because I didn't get it the first time. And that doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention. I can tell the difference between that. But it means that maybe there's a word missing. Maybe a word is used oddly. Maybe the language is just unnecessarily complex for the statement that you're making, or maybe it's like such a run-on sentence that I'm just confused by it. And so when you see this green, try reading those sentences out loud, because you will notice what the error is. Some of them I tell you what the error is, but we are so much better at identifying error when we listen to it rather than when we see it. Which is why my number one proofreading tip is to read out loud, because you'll notice when something's missing. Most of us learn language first orally, so by hearing it and by speaking it rather than by reading it. So those count as local. And I still want to make it clear that these are all different things. So revising is not the same as editing, which is not the same as proofreading. Proofreading is just looking at those very external factors. And I wrote there, puts a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It's not going to make your paper better. You could address every single local revision and still not get a good grade, because that's not where the most points are assigned. And while I don't work on a rubric, it makes sense that the main things I'm going to be looking for in this paper are, Oreos, how good your analysis is, if things are tracking well, if things are structured well, the actual content and ideas, rather than punctuation stuff or one sentence that's not entirely clear. And so we want to be better at global revision, where we're looking to revise those ideas, making sure we're addressing our purpose, making sure we're speaking to our audience. A lot of you guys may have comments about adding context to the quotes. We're imagining that our audience is not within our class. So when you talk about Jerry Seinfeld, when you're discussing automatic or reflective preferences, that's going to come totally out of the blue, and your reader's not going to know what the hell you're talking about. So we need to introduce that to them. The evidence that you've chosen, your analysis, of course, is really big for me, and organization. Oh, this didn't link up. Not bad. I'll just scroll down here. I just grabbed somebody's at random. So there's 3 comments here, and these 2 are definitely global revision. I'm saying we need to analyze this quote. What does it help us understand about privilege? That's going to take a minute to think about. You can't just sort of quickly fix it. The person who wrote this will need to sit back and say, okay, how does this connect with what I was writing about in the first place? And even this, we'll have to stop and say, oh, okay, like what is she talking about? And just because these are on this quote, it doesn't mean that only this quote has this problem. So this one, proofread your quotes, that's a local revision. That's something easy you can go through, do a quick proofread. It doesn't just mean that this quote has it though. Even the local revision comments, they may be scattered throughout. And so we can't just zoom to where the comments are and fix just that area and think that we've addressed everything. We have to be looking at our paper holistically. Skip through here a little bit. Oh, there we go. Now it zooms in. And so part of the way that we're going to go about addressing this, and this makes up for our writing labs from this week, is by crafting a revision memo, which is basically just a 3-paragraph, almost cover letter, where you're going to communicate with me how you went about revising this. We want to make sure that we're conscious of it. And no, I don't think this is a very fun memo to write. However, we've got to just we've got to emphasize, what's the right word? We've got to integrate this practice into all of our writing, or else we're just not going to turn anything good. Everybody's first draft sucks. Everybody's. Mine does. I wish that I'd kept my first drafts. I didn't know I was going to be a teacher, but I wish I'd kept my first drafts in school so you could see just how horrible they are, even in grad school. Even my first drafts of papers I write within academia right now, they're gross. Like, they're so bad and so disjointed. We rely on this. Like, the stuff that you're reading on websites or in books or whatever, they've been heavily edited, and it is night and day from the actual original draft. So every time you think, oh, I'm just not a good writer, no, you just don't have an editor that like you pay to make your stuff better and tell you exactly what to change. We're not quite privileged in that way. Or even if there's no editor, like, you haven't written sometimes 20, 40, 50 drafts of something to get it right. So you're only looking at the end product. So do not feel bad that you have a bunch of comments. Be energized. I know that's a stretch, but try it out. So this revision memo, 3 paragraphs. I'm not picky about how long those paragraphs are. They should just be thoughtful. The first thing you're going to do is make a personal action plan. So it is not very productive to just read through the comments and then try to figure out how to do it. It's very destabilizing often. One of the best ways that you can internalize the comment is to put it in your own words. So take a minute, pull out a sheet of paper or a Word document, and all of my comments, write down, at least like the global ones, write down things that you know you need to change in words that are familiar for you. You're going to just end up kind of checking back on the draft that I commented on over and over and over again, unless it's written in a way that you understand and you have just sort of a one-stop shop to be able to go from there. And I also encourage you to rank it by importance. So you guys probably have an idea of what has more points attached to it, so to speak. Like I said, your analysis. Are your quotes are they, integrated, and you have the Oreos? I'll put it out there that the second cookie is way more important than the first cookie. Doesn't mean it's not important, but when it comes to where your collegiate ideas are expressed, it's in that second cookie. And so if you're not sure how to rank it, definitely schedule office hours with me and we can go through it together. But trust your instinct a little bit here. The things that require the most thought and the things that require the most original, original thought, I guess, not just summary, but like, okay, what do I think? How do I word this? That's where most of the points are going to come from. So ranking in importance, and that means that if you are running out of time and you aren't just correcting something like, oh, I need to reformat my quotes, you're going to the top of that list and starting there, because it's not even productive if you start with those local revisions if you haven't changed the global ones. In paragraph 2, just a description of what you changed. You could sort of think about the ones that took the most time. And in your last paragraph, identify your greatest success revising it, like looking at your new final draft. What are you really proud of with it? And then also, what did you find difficult? Did you see an area totally transform? Were there some spaces that you're like, I see her comments, but I just can't do it? I know that you are not going to address every single comment. That's impossible. However, you can still, call out maybe what you would move, what you would change from there. And this will end up being that first page of your essay, so like a cover letter. So when you submit the final essay, this will be the very first page that I see. If you do not have a cover letter, there's going to be a couple points that are taken off, and then I'm not going to grade it until you do submit that one. So please, please, please make sure you submit this as part of the writing process. So my tips for doing this, it's sometimes helpful to have multiple documents, one with like your older draft and then one with the newer one. Of course, you do have access to it on Canvas, so that's up to you, but it's nice to do a compare and contrast in that way. My favorite tip, of course, read your paper aloud. Speaking through your writing, you catch those awkward transitions, you catch those typos, you catch things that just don't even sound like you. If you are able, if you have a printer and you're able, print it out. Most of us read better on paper than we do on a screen. And it can be helpful for those of us who are kinesthetic learners and really visual learners to highlight and circle things and cross things out. I find that very, very helpful. And lastly, take some time away from your paper. So I suggest reading your comments maybe this week. Take, Saturday off, or even take Friday and Saturday off, and then start it on Sunday. Take at least a full day, but if that's not what you can do, take a couple hours. Bring in a different kind of stimuli, like watching something on Netflix. You need some space before you can start reforming it. It will not work if you just sort of jump into it immediately. You need some time to process it. You need to look upon your paper with totally different, totally new eyes. And please get in touch with me if you're confused about any comments that I made, if the language doesn't make sense to you, if you have no idea how to go about changing that, if you are totally stumped, please schedule office hours. If it's a quick question about just clarifying a comment, feel free to text or email me. But if you want to talk through more than 2 comments, or ask for some advice, please schedule some meetings just via text or email. I've enjoyed seeing a couple of you this week. That was nice to actually see your faces. It really sucks balls teaching online, I've got to say. Enjoy your weekend.